Under the crimson dusk of the desert, an Apache warrior discovers a wounded stranger, an unusual woman hidden beneath a tattered shawl. Her face is pale, her eyes haunted, and she whispers with desperation, "Please, don't take it off." Asterisk, before starting the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The desert stretched endlessly, under a sky painted with molten reds and bruised purples, the sun bowing low as if it feared the coming night. Dust whipped across the jagged rocks and sparse scrub, painting the world in shifting shades of copper. In this unforgiving wilderness, the Apache warrior rode alone, his horse's hooves clattering softly against the stones, a rhythmic echo that seemed too loud in the desert's vast silence. He was a man of few words and fewer mistakes, each decision guided by experience carved into him like the scars on his arms. Yet even the most disciplined warrior can be shaken. He had been tracking a herd of deer when he spotted movement that did not belong to the wind or the animals. There, partially hidden among the jagged outcrops, was a figure sprawled unnaturally on the sand. The warrior slowed, squinting through the heat-hazed air. At first, he thought it was a corpse, but the faint tremor of a hand suggested otherwise. Approaching cautiously, he drew his knife, its obsidian blade catching the last light of the sun. The figure was a woman, or at least, he assumed it was a woman. Her body was small, fragile, and draped in a tattered shawl that looked far too delicate for the desert's harshness. What unsettled him most was her face, partially obscured, pale and almost translucent against the dusty red soil. Her eyes, wide and luminous, met his with a fear so raw it made his chest tighten. "Please, don't take it off," she whispered, her voice shaking as though each word were a prayer or a warning. The words, barely audible over the wind, clawed at something deep within him. The desert had taught him caution, yet curiosity gnawed at his disciplined mind. Why would a stranger plead with him not to remove a simple cloth? He noticed then the edges of the shawl, frayed and stained, wrapped tightly around her shoulders and chest. It was clearly old, perhaps cherished, and the way she clutched it hinted at something beyond mere modesty. He had seen fear before, but this was different. It was the terror of someone hiding something terrible, something that could unsettle even the bravest of men. The warrior studied her cautiously, his instinct screaming that she was no ordinary wanderer. There was a tension in the air, subtle but tangible, like the moment before a hawk swoops. She trembled visibly, and in the waning light, her fingers were almost bone-like as they clutched the cloth. His horse shifted nervously, sensing the unease, snorting at shadows that seemed to twist unnaturally in the dusk, yet he was drawn closer. Something in her gaze, a mixture of desperation and silent pleading, compelled him. In all his years, he had learned that ignoring instinct could be deadly, but so could ignoring curiosity. The desert was full of mysteries, some cruel, some sacred. He could not turn away, even if the pull of the unknown whispered danger with every gust of wind. Tentatively, he reached out, not to grab but to gauge, to understand. The woman recoiled slightly, her body rigid, eyes wide with alarm. "Please," she said again, her voice breaking like dry twigs, "don't take it off. You don't know." She swallowed, and whatever she had meant to say was lost to the desert breeze. The warrior stepped back, respect and caution battling with his desire to uncover the secret hidden beneath the cloth. Something ancient lingered in the air around her, a sense of the sacred and the forbidden intertwined. A warning that the world beyond the visible could be far darker than he imagined. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving only a blood-red afterglow that painted the desert in ominous hues. Shadows deepened in the cracks of the rocks, swallowing the space around the woman. And in that moment, the warrior understood that his decision to respect her plea or to satisfy the gnawing curiosity within him might be the difference between survival and something far more dreadful. He mounted his horse slowly, keeping his distance, eyes never leaving hers. The desert had taught him patience, but the unknown now beckoned like a siren. For a fleeting heartbeat, he wondered, what secret lay beneath the cloth, and why did it tremble with the weight of terror? The answer, he felt in his bones, would change everything. The desert night pressed close, cool and quiet, broken only by the whisper of wind across the rocks and the soft clop of the warrior's horse. He guided her slowly toward his camp, a collection of adobe huts and tents gathered near a trickle of water. His mind raced, torn between caution and compassion. She was clearly no ordinary traveler. Her fear was too profound, her presence too deliberate to be random. And yet, he could not deny the pull of something deeper, something hidden beneath that cloth she clung to as though her life depended on it. The camp was alive with low murmurs. Fires flickered in the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of the men and women gathered around. They noticed the stranger immediately, their eyes widening in curiosity and unease. The warrior dismounted, holding his horse by the reins, and led her into the circle of warmth. "Who is she?" one of the younger hunters asked, voice tinged with suspicion. "She appears lost," the warrior replied cautiously. He did not lie, yet he also concealed the unease gnawing at him. There was something in the way she moved, how she avoided the firelight, how she trembled even under his protective gaze. It did not belong to the simple fear of being far from home. The woman sank to the ground, hugging the shawl tightly. The flickering light revealed the delicate edges of the fabric, tattered but cared for, and something in the warrior's chest tightened. He had seen many wounds, scars, and strange patterns in the sands, but nothing quite like this. The shawl seemed almost sacred, a barrier between her and something the world was not meant to see. The elder, a man whose white-streaked hair caught the firelight like silver threads, stepped closer, leaning heavily on his staff. "Never before have I seen a cloth held with such fear," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Some coverings are not garments. They are prisons." The warrior's eyes narrowed. He had heard warnings before, tales passed down of curses, spirits, and marks that carried their own power. He knew that respect was necessary, yet so was understanding. To turn away now, without knowing what lay beneath, felt like abandoning both duty and honor. But to uncover it blindly could be dangerous, possibly deadly. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. "I will not force you," he said, his voice calm but firm, "but I must know who you are." Her eyes flickered with panic, darting to the shadows beyond the firelight. She shook her head violently. "You do not understand," she whispered. "If it is seen, it will curse you. It will—" Her words broke, swallowed by the night, and her trembling intensified. The warrior studied her, noting the way her shoulders hunched, the way her hands clutched the shawl as if it were a shield against the world. Every instinct screamed that she was hiding something far older, far darker than the desert itself. Yet he also saw the flicker of desperation, the unspoken plea for protection. Around the camp, murmurs grew. Some of the younger warriors muttered about traps and trickery. Others stared in awe, sensing the strangeness of the moment. But the elder's eyes remained fixed on the woman, a mixture of recognition and dread clouding his face. He whispered under his breath, "She carries a weight that was not meant for mortal hands." The warrior felt the tension tighten around him like a cord. He had always relied on instinct, and his instincts told him that the woman's secrecy was deliberate and dangerous. He sensed a power that could not be contained, a truth too heavy for simple understanding. Yet there was no cruelty in her plea, only terror, and that was enough to make him pause. He motioned for the others to keep their distance, circling the fire to give her space. The woman's eyes, wide and luminous in the firelight, met his. In that gaze he saw fear, yes, but also trust. A fragile, trembling trust that he could not ignore. As night deepened, the camp settled into uneasy watchfulness. The woman huddled beneath her shawl, the flickering firelight dancing across her face, while the warrior sat nearby, vigilant and silent. His mind was a battlefield of suspicion and curiosity. The desert had taught him patience, but this was different. The unknown pressed upon him like a living thing, whispering that whatever lay beneath the shawl would not only answer questions, it would demand something in return. And so the night stretched on, heavy with anticipation, shadows, and unspoken dread. The night stretched across the desert like a black silk cloak, heavy and suffocating. Stars glimmered faintly, distant and indifferent, while the wind whispered through the rocks and scrub in hollow, mournful tones. Around the campfire, the tribe slept fitfully in their tents, though the warrior remained awake, eyes fixed on the woman huddled beneath her shawl. She seemed smaller in the darkness, fragile as a bird caught in a trap. Yet there was an undeniable weight to her presence, a tension that pressed on the air itself. The elder approached silently, leaning heavily on his staff, the wood groaning like an old wound. His eyes, clouded yet piercing, studied the stranger with careful scrutiny. "She is not what she seems," he said in a low voice, one that carried across the firelight to the warrior's ears alone. "Some coverings are not merely cloth. They are prisons, and some prisoners should never be freed." The warrior's hand tightened around the hilt of his knife. He had encountered warnings before, cryptic whispers of spirits and omens, but there was gravity in the elder's voice that chilled his blood. He studied the woman's pale face, half hidden in the folds of the tattered shawl. Her breathing was shallow, her trembling constant, as if the cloth itself contained a living force. "Do you mean to say she is dangerous?" he asked cautiously, his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. The elder shook his head slowly. "I do not know if she is dangerous or if the danger lies in the curiosity of those who see her. Some things, once revealed, do not yield to understanding. They demand a price far beyond death." The warrior's eyes narrowed. He had learned long ago that fear could cloud judgment. Still, instinct whispered that there was more here than mere superstition. He looked at her again, the shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, and felt the tug of inevitability. Something hidden beneath that fragile fabric was calling to him. Silent but insistent. As if in answer, a sudden gust of wind swept through the camp, scattering ashes from the fire and sending ripples across the desert sand. The woman flinched violently, clutching the shawl as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered to life. Her voice trembled as she whispered, barely audible above the wind, "You do not understand. It is not safe." The elder's eyes flicked to the shadows beyond the firelight, narrowing in recognition. "The desert carries many voices," he said softly. "Some are warnings, others temptations. But when the wind carries fear, it is never a lie." The warrior felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Something intangible had shifted. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with a presence that was not entirely of this world. Even the firelight seemed to falter, flickering against an unseen resistance, casting jagged, elongated shadows that twisted across the faces of the sleeping tribe. He took a deep breath, forcing calm into his limbs, and sat beside the woman, keeping a careful distance. "I will not force it," he said quietly, repeating his promise from earlier, though now it carried the weight of both warning and curiosity. "But you must trust me. If something is wrong, I can help." The woman's eyes, wide and luminous, flicked to him with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, almost imperceptibly, the elder muttered under his breath, "She carries a weight that was never meant for mortal hands." To see it is to invite the unseen into our world. The warrior's stomach tightened. He had seen the desert play tricks on men's eyes before, seen mirages that whispered of death or fortune, yet this felt different, real, ancient, and alive. Every instinct told him to wait, to honor the warning, but the pull of the unknown was relentless. Something beneath that cloth was calling, silent but undeniable, and he feared that once it was revealed, nothing would ever be the same. As the night deepened, a chill seeped into the camp, unnatural and biting, curling along the warrior's spine. Even the animals seemed restless, a coyote howling in the distance, a bat flitting across the moonlit sky. The woman shivered violently, her hands clutching the shawl as if the very fabric were her lifeline. The warrior closed his eyes for a moment, drawing on patience and discipline, but the whispers of the desert and the elder's ominous words gnawed at his mind. He understood something he could not yet name. The night had shifted, and with it, the fragile boundary between what should remain hidden and what demanded revelation. The omen was clear. The cloth was not merely a covering, it was a seal. And whether out of curiosity, courage, or foolishness, he felt the inexorable pull to see what lay beneath it. The night thickened, swallowing the desert in an oppressive stillness. Even the stars seemed dimmer, distant pinpricks of cold light that offered no comfort. The warrior sat a few paces from the woman, watching her huddled form beneath the shawl. Her shoulders shook with tremors that went beyond cold. This was fear of something intangible, something older than the desert itself. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking into a near-silent plea. "Please don't. Please don't look." Her hands gripped the cloth with a desperation that bordered on agony, her knuckles white as bone. Her words barely carried over the whispering wind. Yet they pressed heavily on the warrior's ears and heart alike. He remained still, the weight of his curiosity warring with the instinctive caution the elder had impressed upon him. He could feel the tension radiating off her, as if the cloth itself quivered under the strain of a force he could neither see nor name. Something about her plea was not the fear of a stranger, it was the fear of a warning, a prophecy too terrible to be spoken aloud. The woman's eyes flicked toward him, wide, luminous, and haunted. Shadows from the firelight caught in the hollows of her face, exaggerating the pallor of her skin, making her appear almost ethereal. "You don't understand," she said, voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "If it's seen, it will not just hurt me. It will." Her words faltered, swallowed by the night, leaving only the trailing echo of dread. The warrior's pulse quickened. Every instinct told him to respect her warning, yet the human mind is a stubborn creature, especially when confronted with mystery. He studied the shawl, noting the careful way she had wrapped it around herself, the urgency with which she defended it from his gaze. It was not mere fabric, it was a barrier, a shield, and perhaps a prison. He sensed the shift before he saw it. The wind changed, curling around them in unnatural patterns, tugging at the edges of the tents and rustling the desert scrub with whispers that sounded almost like speech. Even the fire seemed to hesitate, its flames dancing irregularly as if recoiling from something unseen. The woman flinched violently, her whole body shaking. "Please," she whispered again, louder this time, desperation threading through each syllable. "You don't know. You can't. You don't understand." Her voice cracked, breaking like dry twigs. She buried her face into the folds of the shawl, trembling so violently that it seemed the cloth might tear under the strain. The warrior's heart ached with conflicting emotions. He had seen fear before, had faced countless enemies in the desert, but this was different. This was not the fear of death or pain. It was the terror of something ancient, something beyond human comprehension. And the more he watched her, the more he realized that her fear was not just for herself. It was for him, for anyone who dared to see what she had hidden. A sudden, sharp movement startled him. The woman recoiled as if the air itself had struck her. He noticed, for the first time, that the shawl seemed to move of its own accord, a slight quiver that was more than a reflex. It was as though the cloth were alive, responding to some invisible presence. Her eyes, wide and frantic, flicked to the shadows beyond the firelight. "It's here," she whispered. "It knows. It knows, if you see." The warrior's pulse pounded in his ears. He had always trusted his instincts, but now they wavered under the weight of something intangible and terrible. He could feel the desert around them shifting, almost holding its breath. And the air carried a chill that was unnatural even for this arid land. The woman clutched the shawl tighter, rocking slightly back and forth, her voice a trembling chant of warning. "Please, I beg you, leave it. Do not take it off. You cannot imagine the cost, the curse. It will not forgive." Her terror was infectious, seeping into the warrior's own bones. He felt the hairs on his neck rise, the blood in his veins cool. This was no ordinary fear. This was the fear of the unseen, the terrible. And the ancient, a warning carved into human flesh, whispered through the desert wind, and carried in the trembling of a stranger who had survived something no one else could endure. And in that moment, he realized that the shawl was not merely a covering, not simply a piece of cloth. It was a seal, and whatever it contained, whatever it hid beneath its fragile folds, had the power to change everything if it was ever revealed. The warrior's eyes never left her face, the firelight flickering between them. Her hands clutched the shawl as though it were her lifeline, her very soul. And he knew, with a growing sense of dread, that the decision of whether to respect her warning or satisfy his curiosity would not just be about seeing. It would be about surviving what lay beneath. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind had stilled, leaving the camp in an eerie, suffocating silence. The warrior sat a few paces from the woman, the glow of the fire casting long, flickering shadows across her trembling form. Every instinct told him to wait, to respect her warning. But the pull of the unknown of the secret hidden beneath that fragile shawl was relentless. Her fear was tangible, a living force that seemed to twist the air around her. She clutched the cloth as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to life, rocking slightly, whispering broken pleas. "Please, don't take it off. You don't understand." Her voice cracked with desperation, and the warrior could feel it searing into him, threading panic and awe into the very marrow of his bones. He swallowed hard, his fingers twitching near the hilt of his knife. This was no longer a question of survival in the physical sense. This was a test of will, of patience, and of understanding forces far older than any man in the desert had faced. The elder's warning echoed in his mind. Some coverings are not garments. They are prisons. And yet, curiosity gnawed like a desert snake in his chest, coiling tighter with every trembling plea from the woman. A sudden, unnatural shift in the air made him flinch. The fire flickered violently, casting jagged, writhing shadows across the desert floor. Even the animals, the horse, the coyote stirred uneasily, sensing something unseen. The warrior's pulse pounded in his ears. It was as if the desert itself were warning him, whispering that one wrong move could awaken something far beyond his comprehension. The woman's eyes met his, wide, haunted, shimmering with terror. You can't. She gasped, clutching the cloth to her chest. If it is seen, it will not forgive. It will not. Her words dissolved into a strangled sob, swallowed by the night wind. He felt the pull of inevitability. The shawl was more than fabric. It was a barrier, a seal that contained something alive, something aware. Something that, even now, seemed to reach out through the night, sensing his gaze. Testing the limits of patience and restraint, the warrior's hand twitched, almost involuntarily drawn toward the folds of the shawl. He told himself it was merely curiosity, a need to understand, but deep inside, he felt the ancient whisper of danger pressing against reason. The hair on his neck rose, his veins chilled with the anticipation of witnessing something forbidden. "Please," she whispered again, her voice a broken thread of sound. "Do not. You cannot." Her body quivered violently, and for a moment it seemed the desert itself echoed her fear. The shadows beyond the firelight twisted unnaturally, coiling like smoke with purpose. The warrior could see it now, the faint shimmer, the subtle warping of the air around her. Something responded to the shawl, to the barrier she clung to with desperate hands. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to respect the warning, yet the moment stretched like a taut wire. His eyes met hers once more, and in that gaze he saw something deeper than terror, a plea for mercy, a silent promise that the consequences of revelation were catastrophic. And yet the human mind, stubborn, restless, impatient, resisted restraint. He reached forward slowly, almost ceremoniously, each movement deliberate, aware of the charged atmosphere. The woman gasped sharply, pressing her hands more firmly against the shawl. "No, no," she cried, voice cracking like dry bones. "If you touch it, it will." Her words broke off, but the meaning was clear. Something beyond comprehension lurked beneath that fragile covering, something older than the desert, older than any man's understanding. That the warrior's fingers brushed the edge of the shawl. The air seemed to tighten, to hum with a pressure that pressed against his chest and throat. The firelight danced violently, shadows twisting into grotesque shapes, reaching toward him like fingers. The desert, the very earth beneath them, seemed to recoil. And then, for a heartbeat, the world held still. The woman's sobs quieted, her body frozen in anticipation. He could feel it, a force aware of him, aware of the intention behind his hand. The pull of the unknown, of the ancient and the forbidden, pressed down like a tangible weight. He had reached the threshold, the breaking point. One movement, one tug, one small act of human curiosity, and the secret she had fought so desperately to keep would be revealed. Whatever lay beneath the shawl waited, patient and ancient, ready to respond. And the desert, silent, watchful, eternal, seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the inevitable moment when fear would collide with revelation. The desert seemed to vanish around them, replaced by a heavy silence so absolute it pressed on the warrior's chest. Even the fire's crackle felt muted, as though the flames themselves dared not speak. The woman's trembling had intensified, her hands clinging to the shawl as if her life depended on it, and in some unimaginable way. It did. The warrior's fingers hovered over the cloth, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. His instinct screamed at him to stop, to honor her desperate pleas. Yet something deeper, darker, demanded understanding. Curiosity, defiance, and the inescapable pull of the unknown converged, making his hand move almost of its own accord. "Please," the woman whispered, voice breaking into a strangled plea. Do not take it off. You will regret it. I swear you will regret it." He hesitated for a moment longer, studying her eyes the wide, haunted pools of fear and trust, a paradox he could not reconcile. Then, with deliberate caution, he grasped the edge of the shawl and slowly began to pull. The moment the fabric left her shoulders, the desert seemed to inhale sharply, and the fire's flames wavered violently, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that twisted unnaturally across the camp. The woman's body froze, her breathing caught in a high, shallow gasp, eyes widening as if she could no longer move. Beneath the shawl was not flesh as he had expected, not skin alone. The surface of her back shimmered faintly, pulsating as though alive, yet it was patterned with intricate, writhing designs. Symbols, ancient and indecipherable, coiled across her shoulders and spine like serpents frozen mid-strike. The markings glowed faintly in the firelight, lines of light threading through the darkness like veins of some otherworldly energy. The warrior felt his blood run cold. These were not mere tattoos or scars. They were living things embedded in her flesh yet independent, twisting and pulsing with a life of their own. The patterns seemed to shift when he looked away, rearranging themselves subtly, as though aware of his gaze, eyes. He realized suddenly that among the patterns there were eyes. Too many, too human, blinking slowly and following his every movement. He stumbled back, heart hammering in his chest as a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath him. The woman's sobs cut sharply through the night, though her face remained expressionless, locked in terror and warning. "You? You cannot," she began, but no words could encompass the horror revealed. The symbols pulsed and writhed, their eyes blinking in silent communication, conveying ancient knowledge and endless suffering. The warrior's stomach turned. Every instinct told him to flee, yet his body remained frozen, trapped in a mixture of awe, terror, and disbelief. A cold wind swept through the camp, extinguishing the fire in a single gust. Darkness enveloped them, thick and suffocating, and in the void, the warrior felt the presence of something older than the desert itself. It was patient, watching, waiting. The shawl, now discarded, lay at his feet, utterly mundane in its tattered simplicity, but what it had concealed was alive, eternal, and aware. The woman shivered violently, whispering fragments of warnings. It feeds on those who see. It remembers. It will follow. Her voice was trembling, as if every word cost her something vital. The symbols on her back writhed with increasing intensity, glowing brighter for a heartbeat before dimming. As though breathing in the darkness, the warrior could do nothing but stare. Every nerve screamed to turn away, to forget what he had seen, yet the imprint of the horror was already burned into his mind. His chest felt tight, his limbs heavy with the realization that some secrets are too vast, too terrible to be contained by flesh or fear alone. The desert, silent and indifferent once more, seemed to settle around them, but the warrior knew better. The awakening of what lay beneath the shawl had changed the night and himself forever. Some truths once unveiled demand a reckoning, and he could feel it now. The presence beneath the woman's skin was patient, ancient, and far from finished with him. The woman collapsed, clutching herself, sobbing in exhaustion and terror. The warrior fell to his knees nearby, the enormity of what he had just witnessed crushing his chest. The shawl's secret had been revealed, and nothing could unsee it. The desert held its secrets, the symbols pulsed in the darkness, and he understood, with the cold certainty of dread, that he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The desert no longer felt like the world he had known. The air hung thick and heavy, charged with a presence that was older than the mountains, older than the windswept sands. The warrior staggered back from the woman, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The symbols on her back, once merely writhing lines, now shifted with purpose. Their movement was deliberate, almost intelligent, like serpents weaving secret messages across her skin. And the eyes, he could not forget the eyes. Each one blinked independently, aware, watching him with a sentience that felt both alien and terrifyingly human. They followed his every movement, unblinking when he tried to turn away. His blood ran cold. The markings were no longer passive. They were aware, sentient, a living map of ancient power and malevolent intent. The woman shrieked suddenly, a sound that pierced the night like shattering glass. The desert responded. Shadows leapt from the rocks, writhing and coiling in unnatural shapes. The wind rose, carrying whispers in a language older than the Apache tongue, incomprehensible yet resonant with meaning. It clawed at his mind, tugging at the edges of his sanity. The warrior stumbled backward, almost falling as the symbols flared with an intensity that illuminated the darkness like lightning. He saw visions in the firelight, fleeting glimpses of a world beyond the desert, a realm of endless shadows and eyes, of twisted forms that slithered between reality and nightmare. Each blink of the markings was a pulse of memory, a fragment of something terrible that had existed long before humans had walked the earth. The woman's trembling became convulsions. She pressed her hands over her back, trying in vain to restrain the writhing shapes. Her voice was raw with fear, yet she whispered warnings that made no logical sense. It remembers. It consumes. Do not touch its gaze. It follows those who see. The warrior's heart raced. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse, faintly at first, then stronger, as if the desert itself were alive, feeding on the awakening. He realized with growing horror that the symbols were not just marks, they were a conduit. They connected her to something vast and ancient, something that existed beyond the physical world, and now that he had seen them, he was bound to it too. A shadow detached itself from the rocks, solidifying into a form that was both human and monstrous, a mirror of the patterns on her back. It moved with impossible speed, gliding across the sand without disturbing a grain, its blinking eyes locked onto him. The warrior raised his knife, but it passed through the creature as though it were nothing, a ripple of darkness that radiated cold intent. The woman cried out, trembling violently. It is coming, it knows. It will claim. Her words dissolved into sobs. She collapsed forward, curling into herself, but the markings continued to writhe, each pulse sending a shiver of dread into the warrior. He realized with chilling clarity that what she had warned about was not metaphorical. The force beneath the shawl was active, alive and aware of him now. The desert around them seemed to bend, the shadows deepening unnaturally, wrapping the camp in suffocating darkness. The whispers in the wind grew louder, more insistent, echoing in his mind. Images of past victims flashed before him, men and women who had glimpsed the forbiddens and had been consumed by terror. He understood that seeing was no longer neutral observation itself had consequences. The warrior's mind raced. He could not flee, could not turn away. The entity was now aware of him, tethered to him by the act of witnessing. Every instinct screamed to destroy the connection, yet he had no weapon, no charm, no knowledge that could sever it. Only one certainty remained. He was trapped, caught in the gaze of something ancient and malevolent. A horror that had lain hidden for centuries, now awakened and still. The markings pulsed, the eyes blinking, watching, learning. Each heartbeat brought him closer to the full weight of what he had unleashed. The curse that had slept beneath the shawl finally aware of a new observer. The desert itself seemed to recoil, a silent witness to the horror now unbound. The warrior's knees buckled, the knife falling uselessly to the sand. The woman's sobs echoed, fading into whispers that only he could hear. You cannot leave. You cannot forget. It will follow you. And in that moment, he knew the truth. Some secrets are not meant for mortal eyes. To see them is to invite them into your life, to awaken them fully. And there is no escape once the ancient horror has been revealed. The desert was no longer a place of sand and sky. It had become something unrecognizable, a void suffused with shadows and whispers, a realm caught between life and some darker eternity. The warrior knelt on the scorched earth, every muscle trembling, every nerve ablaze with fear. The woman lay collapsed before him, clutching the writhing symbols on her back as if her very existence depended on them. He had seen the living patterns. The blinking eyes, the ancient curse that pulsed and writhed beneath her flesh. And in seeing, he had become tethered to it. The desert, once silent and indifferent, now seemed aware of him, holding him under its gaze as surely as the entity beneath the shawl did. The whispers in the wind grew louder, clearer, almost intelligible. They spoke not in words but in intent, filling his mind with visions of endless darkness, of eyes that never blinked and shapes that twisted through realms beyond comprehension. Each pulse of the symbols burned into his memory, etching knowledge that was never meant for human minds. He realized with a cold, shattering clarity, there is no returning from this. Once the veil has been lifted, the price is eternal. The woman's sobs subsided into tremulous, gasping breaths. Her eyes met his, wide and imploring, conveying the horror of what had been revealed without words. "Do you see now?" she whispered, voice hoarse and trembling. "Do you understand? Once it knows you, you belong to it. Once seen, it follows." The warrior tried to speak, to reassure her or himself, but no words could hold weight against the knowledge now lodged in his mind. The desert shifted around him, shadows stretching unnaturally, coiling, writhing, as if the land itself were complicit in the curse. The eyes within the pattern seemed to blink toward him, marking him, claiming him. He realized he could no longer look away without feeling them pierce his soul. A cold wind swept through the camp, extinguishing the last traces of fire. Darkness swallowed the woman, the warrior, and the camp alike. In the void he could sense the presence fully, vast and patient, stretching beyond the boundaries of comprehension. It pulsed in the shadows, a heartbeat older than any human life. Aware of his awareness, he sank to his knees, pressing his palms into the sand as if grounding himself could anchor him against the terror. But grounding was useless. The moment of seeing had been the moment of binding. Whatever had been hidden beneath the shawl had marked him. Its knowledge of him was intimate, eternal. The desert had witnessed the unveiling, and now he carried the weight of it inside himself. The woman whispered one last time, barely audible, "You cannot run?" It remembers everything. All who look, all who know, they pay the price. Her words faded into a low hum, almost merging with the sound of the wind, leaving him alone with the creeping, intelligent darkness. He tried to rise, to flee into the familiar desert, but each step felt heavier, each breath tighter. The knowledge within him was no longer contained by thought or memory. It had become part of his very being, reshaping his perception, coloring his senses with the horror of what he had seen. Every shadow now seemed alive, every whisper a secret warning of eyes watching just beyond the corner of his vision. The warrior understood, with a clarity as sharp as obsidian, that the world he had known was gone. Some truths are not meant for mortal minds, and some secrets, once glimpsed, demand a price far beyond death. The curse beneath the shawl had not merely been a hidden horror, it had been a sentinel, guarding ancient knowledge. And now, having been witnessed, it had claimed him. The desert, silent once again, seemed to stretch endlessly, indifferent yet complicit. Somewhere faintly, the whisper of her voice lingered. "It follows. It will always follow." The warrior sank fully to the sand, chest heaving, mind aflame with the knowledge that some revelations cannot be unlearned, some horrors cannot be escaped, and in that eternal moment, he understood the true cost. Seeing is binding, knowing is eternal, and some truths can never be undone. The shawl's secret had been revealed, and in the quiet desert night, the warrior became a vessel of the ancient, patient horror he had dared to witness. The stars burned coldly overhead, silent witnesses to the inevitable as the desert reclaimed its quiet, leaving only the echo of what had been unleashed and the price of knowing.